The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 66. Potions, Passing, Panic, Protection. Good luck today with your apparition test. I know you don't need luck. You'll do just fine. And if not, I guess we'll test together in June.
Thank you. Ron is nervous. Hopefully he can do it. I wish you could test too. You've already done it perfectly several times.
That's one of the perils of dating a wizard who's younger than you, I'm afraid. Have fun.
Enjoy potions class.
Potions was not at all enjoyable, despite Professor Slughorn's efforts to make it so. Draco was still feeling a little weak and woozy from the experiences in the forest the day before, not to mention daydreams of time spent with Hermione over the Easter holidays. He had still been stuck on the vanishment problem, that is to say, how the cabinet's magical signature had been affected by being vanished but not dispersed into non-being. It was as though it was stuck between two planes of existence. Draco almost wondered, if he were to remove the cabinet from the room, would it cease to exist? His daydreaming was interrupted by Slughorn's jolly demeanour.
As we're so few, we'll do something fun. I want you all to brew me up something amusing.
Ernie, ever the tosspot, chimed in.
That sounds good, sir.
What do you mean, something amusing? Draco said, slightly annoyed. He'd felt on the verge of a breakthrough with the cabinet, and now this to bother with.
Oh, surprise me,
said Slughorn, who clearly just wanted to sit back and read his novel, of which he looked to be near the end. Draco skimmed his copy of Advanced Potion-Making listlessly. He settled on the first thing that wasn't used to kill, drug, or damage someone, or anything. A hiccuping solution. His threshold for amusing was low this weekend, after closely evading death in the Forbidden Forest. Again. At the end of class, he was packed and ready to go at once. He hurried to the library, found a remote spot, and whispered his password to the handkerchief. Vinca Major. Did you pass? Her answer came at once. Yes! Ron just missed it, so he'll try again in June. Draco snickered, then wrote, We'll all be waiting with bated breath. No need to be so smug, Draco. He nearly jumped out of his chair. She was standing there, one table away, handkerchief in hand, smirking at him. The handkerchief heated in his hand as her message arrived. He stood and crossed to her with a grin, the first one he'd had in days, likely since their time spent in the room of requirement. Congratulations on your passing grade. I knew you could do no less, but I'm still happy for you. She pretended to pout, looking up at him with her sultry coppery eyes, through the fringe of her lashes. There wasn't a grade, though. At his inquiring look, she elaborated. I just mean, it was either you passed or you failed. I wanted an outstanding. Her exaggerated frown made him laugh, as though he'd sipped a bit of Potter's euphoria potion. He took her in his arms and pecked a trail of kisses along her neck, biting gently after he passed her collar. Which? You're always outstanding. You don't need Wilkie Twycross telling you so. Merlin, my, have you ever seen that man eat a shrimp? Another scroll awaited him on his nightstand a week later. He feared it might be Hagrid again, needing a bloodletting done on a Thunderbird or something. But when he opened it and recognized the handwriting, he thought he'd rather drain the blood from 100 Thunderbirds than have gotten this letter. Draco, I have learned from no less than the Dark Lord himself that you have been given a most valuable and coveted assignment. I trust that he has impressed upon you the necessity of this mission. You must succeed. The future of our family, our very lives, your life, all of that hangs in the balance. He has made it clear that if you return without the mission completed, you will be tortured and killed. I have taught you all I could, and whilst I fear
that you do not have the nerve and strength to complete this mission. You must do what needs to be done."
The letter was not signed, but Draco knew his father's handwriting well.
"There you are!"
Myrtle floated through the door of the last stall, hurrying towards him. He'd just escaped his dormitory for the toilet down the hallway before the tears began.
"I've been wondering how you've been,"
Myrtle said sweetly. She noticed his tears then, and began cooing almost in joy.
"Ooh, what's happened?"
"I don't want to talk about it," Draco said dully.
"I knew you'd come back. I was telling Harry and that other boy just the other day."
"What did you tell Potter?"
he thundered at her, towering over her as menacingly as he could over a being made of non-matter.
"Just that I missed you, and that I thought you liked me, that we were so alike."
"We're nothing alike, Myrtle. You cry in the lab all day."
"You do too,"
the ghostly girl retorted.
"Besides that, you're dead, and I'm alive, remember? You got killed by—"
At this, he stopped. Perhaps they were more similar than he'd thought. He took a deep breath and started again.
"I apologize, Myrtle. It's been a long day. I just got a letter from my father, see?"
"I never hear from my father," Myrtle said mournfully. "He has dementia. He lives in an old folks' home near York, where I grew up."
"What about your mother?" Draco asked to be polite, but then he wished he hadn't.
"She was hit by a car in 1968. She's a ghost too, you know. She's quite bloody, and she doesn't like to have to stay outside on the road all the time."
"What do you mean?" Draco asked against his better judgment.
"Well, she's a muggle ghost, isn't she? So she can't travel around wherever she'd like a magical ghost can. She's tethered to the place she died."
As Draco left the toilet, he admonished himself for being so foolish as to think that Myrtle's mundane family history might get his mind off of his own problems. That night's dreams featured a bloody, ghostly Narcissa, stranded on an empty road, being hit over and over by one of the ministry cars he'd ridden in a few times before. She would rise again, only to be driven through once more. At some point, Draco looked at the driver and was horrified to see his own face. In his next Ancient Runes class, Draco found another unpleasant reminder of the ever-spiraling bad decisions he'd made this year. Katie Bell, recovered and rested from her brush with death, had returned to the school. She sat chatting with Genevieve Whittaker, and whilst she looked perfectly fine, Draco felt like a vast pit of despair had opened beneath him, and he was falling in. He tried to keep it together as he and Hermione took out their materials for their translations project, but he began to breathe too rapidly, feeling as though he was getting both too much and too little air, all at the same time. His fingers were tingling, his heart seemed to be trying to leap from his chest, and he was sweating profusely under his clothes.
"Are you all right?"
she asked quietly. I don't know," Draco said, barely able to get the words out. He felt as though he might fall out of his chair like Potter last year, in the History of Magic OWL exam.
"I'll be right back,"
she said quickly, and Draco could not respond. He wanted to ask her not to leave, beg her to stay with him and not let him die here, but she was already gone. Thankfully, she returned in less than a minute, though to Draco it felt like hours.
"Come on. I've told Professor Babbling you're not feeling well, and I'm going to walk you to the hospital wing."
She gathered their things, stuffing them haphazardly into their bags, then had him stand and walk to the door with her holding his arm at the elbow. His odd behavior had attracted the attention of the other students, but no one seemed too fussed, and Draco could not be asked to care how this looked. If he was dying, at least he would do it with his witch next to him. They exited the door of the classroom and turned left, Hermione raising her wand and casting a non-verbal spell. Halfway down the corridor they found a convenient alcove and ducked inside. Hermione made him sit on the floor and put his head down near his knees. Instantly, the spinning sensation he'd been experiencing lessened. There was a clinking sound, and Hermione picked up a vial that had just landed on the floor. "Take this," she ordered, unstopping the vial. She held it out to him, and he grabbed her hands with shaking fingers, pulling the vial towards him and drinking it in one. "I summoned a calming draught from my room. You should feel better in a moment." He dropped his head again, focusing on nothing except the feel of her hand running up and down his spine, nails scratching lightly, centering him, calming him. After a moment he was able to raise his head. "Thank you," he said shakily. "I'm not sure what the hell just happened there." "You had a panic attack? Any idea what set it off?" He exhaled slowly. "I guess seeing Belle sitting there, looking perfectly normal and healthy, knowing that I was responsible for what happened to her. She lost 6 months of her life. Fuck, she could have lost her life. And all because of me, because I was too cowardly to—" But the blasted secrecy bond stopped him. "Yes, it was a terrible thing, and thank Merlin that it did not work, that Katie and Ron didn't suffer more because of it. And yet I still have to—" The bond stopped him again. "I don't know what to do." "To be honest, I don't know either. You've been asked to murder, and you're not a murderer. And I've been asked to keep a lot of secrets, and I don't like deceiving the people I love. Yet, here we are." "Don't try to equate what I've done with what you've done. You've done nothing wrong, and I've done everything wrong," Draco said hoarsely. "I've kept things from my friends. The fact that I know you have a mission of murder. I know you're trying to repair something that will help you with that mission in the room of requirement. Harry thinks that I can help him get in there and find out what it is, and the truth is I likely could. But I also don't want to. Maybe part of me just doesn't want to know, and that part of me also wonders if you're doing the right thing." Draco's silver eyes flashed at her in astonishment. "I'm not. Killing is not the answer. It shouldn't be the answer." "I know, but then I thought, it's like you said. If it's not you, it's someone else coming to do it. And if it isn't you, you'll die. Your mother, your friends, your elves, me. As much as I don't want you to do this, it's happening. Whether you or I want it to happen." Hermione's cheeks were streaked with tears. He pulled her close then, comforting her as she had just comforted him. For not the first time Draco wished to be anywhere but here. To be named something different, to be born somewhere else, to have normal, mundane abilities, to know a different way of life. But one thing, there was one thing in his life that he would never want to leave behind, and she was sitting in his lap, curled against him, crying her heart out into his robes as he held her tight. The next afternoon they met in the library to finish the section of Ancient Runes translations project that they had not gotten done in class the day before. They chose a table near the back. As it was the short span of time between classes ending and dinner beginning, many students were taking a break in their common rooms, so they had the library mostly to themselves. Still, to ensure a bit of privacy, Draco had cast a disillusionment spell over their table. That kind of concealment enchantment did not work extremely well within the boundaries of Hogwarts because of the particular wards in place, but it provided them with a tiny bit of concealment, enough at least to have a moment to break apart and act normal if Madame Pince or a student were to walk by. He had just finished the wand movement for it. Hermione turned to him, a questioning look in her eyes. "Non videri totalis? Entirely not seen?" He smiled ruefully. "Yes,
It won't hold up long because of the wards here at Hogwarts, but it's a good protective spell, nonetheless. We should at least have a bit of warning before someone sees us."
"Where did you learn that? Is Snape teaching the Slytherins extra defensive lessons that no one else knows about?" Hermione asked sharply, frowning in anger at the idea that there were lessons that she might be missing out on.
"Merlin Witch, no. Nothing like that. Well, to be honest, I knew a few from a pretty young age. You're familiar with my father, of course. Sometimes it's nice to be a bit hidden, if you know what I mean. But lately I've been thinking about them again, and I looked up several useful ones. I thought perhaps you would like to—" At this, he reached into his book bag and withdrew a book into which he had inserted several small scraps of parchment to mark certain places within it. She snatched it up eagerly from his hands, intrigued by the idea of a new book, particularly a defensive one.
"Hiding in Plain Sight, a practical guide for magical folk in a mundane world," she read, flipping to look at the inside cover. "This was published in Massachusetts in the late 1600s. This was full of witches and wizards after the Salem witch trials."
He nodded, reaching out to open the book for her. "I've marked several spells. They might be useful to you. Just in case. Well, just in case you want to protect your family or use them yourself. If things go the way, well, if, you know, things might turn badly very quickly, and you need to know ways to protect yourself. Many of these enchantments are used to hide and strengthen the boundaries of pureblood homes, and if they're used properly and completely, they will be nearly impenetrable."
This is wonderful, Draco." Her copper eyes danced across the page, absorbing the words and illustrations of wand movements.
"Good. I'm glad you like it. So, ancient runes?" He smiled at her, tilting his head a bit.
"Well, I hate to waste a perfectly good spell. No one can see us, you say?"
Draco's heartbeat quickened. "No. Why do you ask?"
"So, no one will notice if I—"
She dropped her right hand to his lap. "I mean, I'll notice."
Draco's voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat. Do you think you can finish this page by yourself?" With her left hand, Hermione dragged the top page of the project over to his part of the table and placed it in front of him.
"I can," he answered, his lips lifting in a half-smile. Merlin. He could never get enough of this witch.
Chapter 67. Temptations, Translations, Tribulations. "Are you sure you can finish this entire page of runes translations all by yourself, Draco?"
Hermione's hand below the table moved deftly, causing his lizard brain to take over. "Absolutely. 100%.
"And this charm you cast, it covers the table, but does it cover whatever happens under the table?" she asked innocently.
Yes, it covers it all."
Draco's breath was coming faster now. Hermione's right hand began to wander below the table. Draco kept his head up straight, not daring to look down. "Get to work, Draco. I'm certain those runes can't translate themselves," she said from next to him, teasingly.
He drew the paper close and tried to focus on it. The symbols swam in and out of focus. "All right, this one is far. Hermione giggled. "This is bacon. No, talon." His mind was having a hard time focusing on anything except her hand right now. There was a shuffle nearby, and Draco looked up to see Neville Longbottom walking in their direction. Hermione saw him and dove quickly under the table. Neville looked up, seeming not to see Draco at first, but then did a double-take. "Oi, Malfoy! Didn't see you there when I first walked up. That was odd. Hey, you didn't happen to write down that essay prompt?" But whatever essay prompt it was that Neville had not written down was forgotten, as the hiding spell faded and Hermione came into view under the table. The eyes of the two Gryffindors met, and both turned bright red.
Hermione came out from under the table and sheepishly took her seat, her face flushed, and eyes looking anywhere but at Neville.
Defense, goats, ghosts, never mind.
Neville veered off left and focused on walking away quickly, eyes locked forward as colour crept up his cheeks. He bumped into a low library stool and nearly fell sideways into a shelf before rounding a corner and hurrying away. They were silent for about 5 seconds before erupting into nearly silent giggles.
Did you finish the translation?"
she asked with a smile. "No, not even a little bit. Can you help me a bit more?"
"You prat,"
she admonished lightly, taking the translation from him. They worked in silence for a while, and after about 30 minutes she stretched her arms behind her.
"Almost time to go. Harry and Ron should be in the Great Hall by now."
Suddenly she dropped her arms, frowning down at the parchment at which she'd been staring for several minutes. What's wrong?" he asked.
"Well, I was going off the assumption that this section of ruins was old Persian cuneiform, but then I noticed this."
She pointed at one symbol, pointing out a small shape within the rune.
"I thought this was the letter D in Old Persian, but I think it might actually be Sumerian cuneiform, based on this letter O, see? So we were mistranslating this as destiny, but it's actually
harmony," Draco finished, eyes wide and staring at the spot on the parchment under her finger.
"Right."
She looked up at him, lovely copper eyes sparkling.
"Kind of like us. No one would have ever said that we would be destined for each other, but we've got harmony."
She smiled.
"Sorry, that was cheesy."
"A bit." He managed a smile.
"I should get to dinner," she said,
beginning to pack up her things. "Right," he said, doing the same with his books and quills. "I told Blaise I would meet him for Quidditch practice, so we'll be eating late."
"Okay. Love you."
She gave him a quick peck on the lips and hurried away. "I love you," he said, a bit numb. He turned once more to look at the page in front of him, the page they had just been working on. He had seen that symbol before, and had made the same translations mistakes that Hermione had made, thinking that it read destiny, when in fact it was harmony. The only difference being she had noticed it in a school assignment. He had noticed it on a sinister-looking vanishing cabinet, deep within the room of hidden things. It would likely take a bit of time before he heard back from Borgin, but a part of him knew that it was eventually going to work. There was still the matter of the vanishment, still something preventing it from working instantaneously and perfectly, but he now knew the incantation, and he'd figured out the wand movement. Harmonia, nectar, passus. He spoke the incantation and sent it to Borgin on the coins, so that he could do the same from his side. Then he waited, petting one of the small birds that had perched upon his wrist, curious to see what he was doing. After a moment, his coin warmed in his pocket. "It is done." Draco opened the cabinet door slowly and took a deep breath. He withdrew from his pocket an apple, which he had been saving for his dinner so that he could work late in the room. He had lied again to Hermione. The Slytherins were holding Quidditch practice, and Blaise would be eating late, but this work on the cabinet was too pressing, so he'd skipped Quidditch practice. The fact was, he likely wasn't going to be allowed to attend school here next year, so he didn't need to worry about next year's team. He closed the door, and the cabinet began to rumble as it had never done before. There was a brief flash, and the entire cabinet seemed to shimmer and sway, as though barely holding on to its current state of being. Then there was stillness. Draco stood, holding his breath, bird on his arm forgotten. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 3. His coin warmed again in his palm at the 6-minute point.
Repeat the incantation." Draco did so, pronouncing each symbol distinctly, as though pronouncing a death sentence. The rumbling noises again, and the cabinet tilted suddenly, no, slanted, he thought, as though it had been built at a 20-degree angle from square. It shimmered again as though made of liquid, then righted itself with finality. He hesitated, then reached for the door. The apple was there, and at first glance appeared almost normal. When he took it out, he realized that it was not quite the same. It had a slant to it as well. Not as though it had been crushed, but as though it had grown at an angle, where before it had been perfect. Its reddish color was darker, and it was mushier, as though it was slightly aged from when it left, though no mold appeared to be growing on it. He picked it up, turning it in his hand, and gasped. A bite had been taken from the apple. Juices ran down into his hand from the punctures in the skin. 2 rows of teeth had sunk into the flesh of the apple, ripping it from the core. The teeth looked to be all pointy and sharp and even. Werewolf, the instinctual part of his brain thought. Greyback must have been at the shop during the trial. Draco dropped the apple and ran from the room, ignoring the birds in their frantic flurry of flight at his sudden departure. As if by instinct, Draco raced down the nearest staircase, going towards where he knew Hermione to be in the Great Hall. He was panicked, near tears. It was seeing Katie Bell in ancient runes all over again. He flew down another staircase, then another and another, splashed some water on his face, then tried to walk up to the hospital wing for another calming draught. It wasn't so unusual for any WT-level students to have a bit of a breakdown as end-of-year exams approached, after all. He stumbled to the row of sinks on one wall and twisted the faucet on, then greedily scooped the water onto his face, not minding that his collar and jumper front were getting soaked. The water streaked in rivulets down his neck, seeping into his shirt. The sensation made him think of blood trickling down his neck, and his mind flashed upon a set of razor-sharp teeth, an exposed neck, a spurting stream of blood. He screamed in anguish, tears falling fast and thick upon his face, mixing with the water. Fuck! I can't do this! Don't! Came a familiar voice behind him. He looked up, expecting to see her reflection in the mirror, but no one was there. Of course, ghosts didn't have reflections, he reminded himself. He looked down at the water pooling in the sink, imagining it turning a reddish pink. Myrtle approached his side. "Don't cry. Tell me what's wrong. I can help you. It'll be all right." "No one can help me," he said. The water, which had felt cool and refreshing a few moments before, now felt like ice, as though he was losing blood, and with it feeling in his hands and face. He shook with panic and fear, and no amount of willing himself to calm down could stop it. There were less than 2 months left in the term. The cabinet still wasn't right, and once it was, Fenrir Greyback, the worst beast he'd ever met besides his aunt and Voldemort, was waiting on the other side. "I can't do it. I can't do any of this. It won't work. And unless I do it soon, he says he'll kill me." He drew in a deep breath that didn't feel like enough. He gulped again, then looked at himself in the mirror. He looked pitiful. The heir to 2 noble and ancient houses within the Sacred 28, and here he was, barely holding himself upright over a dirty sink. A slight bit of movement in the spotty mirror's reflection, far to his left, caught his eye. He looked up, squinting through the splashed water, to find himself staring into the eyes of the boy who lived as a perpetual thorn in his side.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.